How do we reverse engineer elite technique? Well, we step into their shoes. We step into their perspective. But first, let's arrange the necessary parts into specific levels, starting with the primary components, secondary components, tertiary, and so forth. The primary components are the indivisible parts, neither classified as the upper body nor the lower body. This is the central point from which other components build upon, as we'll see later. The muscles involved in the primary level include the rectus abdominis with fibers that run vertically, allowing you to curl the upper body and lower body to the front when maximally contracted. You can also curl the body the other way when the lower part of the spinal erectors move the lower back. The six pack's function here is to keep the T-spine stable. If you've caught on, then yes, this resembles the ideal top pull position in the breaststroke. Alternatively, the rectus abdominis can also counterbalance. As an effect, you're neither favoring the back chain nor the front chain. So the opposing tension creates a straight body line, similar to the top of a deadlift, for example, or the upkick portion of a dolphin kick. Those movements can be neatly categorized into core compression, a compressing motion of the torso which can also bend closer to the back as in a breaststroke pull or bend closer to the front as in a flip turn. Now let's move on to its opposite, which is core extension, involving the transverse abdominis embedded deeper in the torso. Unlike the six pack whose fibers run vertically, this waistband-like muscle have fibers that wrap the body horizontally to create a squeezing or holding effect that stabilizes the lower back and allows for proper mobility of the T-spine. Flipping onto the back, the spinal erectors also help extend the torso like a spring that is outstretched. With two out of the way, we have one more primary component, better called as core slinging, since its line of action resembles a sling shape. The external and internal obliques are labeled separately because they sit on top of each other. When the external obliques link with the internal obliques on the opposite side, rotation occurs. For freestyle and backstroke, the spinal erectors add extra tension for the serape effect to fully work. This tugging and twisting motion is why we have coined swim rotations as the ring. With that, we have core compression, extension, and core slinging to complete the primary components. The next level involves the shoulder blade of the upper body and the hips of the lower body. The goal of lower body movements are much more simpler. In fact, there are only two patterns we're trying to build, which includes the hinge pattern, squat pattern, and their single leg counterparts. Hinge patterns are labeled as such because they focus more on the hip hinge. This pattern also requires the upper legs to favor internal rotation during the lowering phase. This translates to the down kick when transferred to swimming. Squat patterns also require mobile hips, but the emphasis is more about staying upright, using the knees, and favoring external rotation during the lowering phase, as in the breaststroke kick recovery. This is an entire topic in itself, so let's move on to the upper body components. For the secondary level, the shoulder blade is the main object of concern. Most movements require the shoulder blade to lock in a posterior tilt to avoid slouching, which is why they are classified higher in this diagram. The ones listed below are the basis for the more functional, compound type movements, including overhead movements, vertical pulling, horizontal pulling, and horizontal pushing. But remember that these are compound movements, which means that components from different levels must be combined together. Notice how we separate those that work better with a specific type of shoulder rotation. With what we have so far, we can already map out the components required in certain positions like the butterfly extension shown here. This is one of the major goals of the so-called first-person perspective, which is to go beyond the limit of what the camera angles show. There are movements and positions that are not as obvious on film but are just as crucial, such as the ever important core contraction and especially its specific type. Also worth mentioning is scapular tilting or locking and the type of shoulder rotation we are biasing towards. The arrangement of the components is also not an accident. For example, the hands and forearms are crucial to propulsion, but they are listed last in the hierarchy because of the fact that the body is arranged to function from the center. Skipping to the last components would be like pushing the last piece of a domino instead of pushing from the first component to create a connected effect. With this concept finally introduced, I can better show what I'm looking at when discussing ideal swim technique in future videos. The implications go beyond just identifying parts. Every learning progression that we'll suggest will be based on the first person perspective, with the goal of letting the swimmer internalize and transfer these seemingly complicated concepts into fluid motion. Being able to teach and replicate elite technique is already a big goal and a huge achievement if met. But there is always a possibility that we can also unlock ideas beyond just replicating the greats. What ideas await out there?